Hey guys, this is Mrs. Klein.
Hello, everyone. It's Miss Burkles.
We are here today with your podcast for Lesson 6. Lesson 6 is entitled Life in Medieval Towns. If you want to follow along in your history book, you guys can. We're starting on page 77 today. The guiding question that goes along with this lesson is, what was life like in medieval European towns?
Our vocab for this lesson is apprentice, charter, common law, and guild. Starting with the introduction, at the start of the Middle Ages, most lived in the countryside either on feudal manors or in religious communities. But by the 12th century, towns were emerging around castles and monasteries and along trade routes. These bustling towns became centers of trade and industry.
All right, in this lesson, you guys, you're going to learn about the growth of medieval towns. Then you're going to look at several aspects of daily life. You will explore trade and commerce, homes and households, disease and medical treatment, crime and punishment, and finally, leisure and entertainment.
Growth of medieval towns. By the High Middle Ages, towns were growing again. One reason for their growth was improvements in agriculture. Another reason for the growth of towns was the revival of trade.
All right, some towns grew wealthier because local people specialized in making specific types of goods. For example, towns in Flanders, which is in present-day Belgium, and the Netherlands were known for their fine woolen cloth.
At the beginning of the Middle Ages, towns were generally part of the domain of a feudal lord. As towns grew wealthier, town dwellers began to resent the lord's feudal rights and his demand for taxes.
Many towns became independent by purchasing a royal charter, which granted them the right to govern themselves, make laws, and raise taxes.
Medieval towns began as centers for trade, but they soon developed into places where many goods were produced as well. Both trade and production were overseen by organizations called guilds.
Guilds provided help and protection for the people doing a certain kind of work, and they maintained high standards.
Guild members paid dues to their organization, which paid for the construction of guild halls and for guild fairs and festivals. It was not easy to become a member of a guild. Starting around age 12, a boy and sometimes a girl became an apprentice. At the end of 7 years, apprentices had to prove to the guild that they had mastered their trade. If the guild approved of the work, the apprentice was given the right to become a master and set up his or her own businesses.
All right, trade and commerce. As trade and commerce grew, so did towns. By the High Middle Ages, more local people were buying and selling more kinds of products. With the growth of trade and commerce, merchants grew increasingly powerful and wealthy.
Not everyone prospered, however. Medieval towns commonly had sizable Jewish communities, but in Christian Europe, they often faced deep prejudice. The hostility of Christians, sometimes backed up by laws, made it difficult for Jews to earn their living.
One opportunity that was open to Jews was to become bankers and moneylenders. This work was generally forbidden to Christians. They were often looked down upon and abused for practicing this wicked trade.
While medieval towns were typically small and crowded. In poorer neighborhoods, several families might occupy a single house with only one room in which they cooked, ate, and slept.
Wealthy merchants often had splendid homes. But even for wealthy families, life was not always comfortable compared to life today.
Growing up in a medieval town wasn't easy either. About half of all children died before they became adults, and those who did survive began preparing for their adult roles around the age of 7.
Holy crap, at 7, people are already trying to figure out what they're going to do when they're a grown up. Holy moly. All right, in general, people of the Middle Ages believed in an orderly society in which everyone knew their place, which totally ties, you guys. Like, think about what we just learned about feudalism in our last lesson. It absolutely kind of like ties in with that.
Disease and medical treatment. Unhealthy living conditions in medieval towns led to the spread of disease. Towns were very dirty places.
People lived crowded together in small spaces and usually bathed only once a week, if that. Rats and fleas were common and often carried diseases.
Common diseases for which there was no cure at this time included measles, cholera, smallpox, and scarlet fever. The most feared disease was bubonic plague, known as the Black Death.
No one knew exactly how diseases were spread at this time. Medieval doctors believed in a combination of prayer and medical treatment, many involving herbs. Other treatments were based on less scientific methods. For example, medieval doctors sometimes consulted the positions of the planets and relied on magic charms to heal people.
Besides being unhealthy, medieval towns were noisy, smelly, crowded, and often unsafe. People accused of crimes were held in dirty, crowded jails. And in the early Middle Ages, trial by ordeal or combat was often used to establish an accused person's guilt or innocence.
Punishments for crimes were very harsh. Executions were carried out in public, often in front of large crowds. In England, kings in the early 1100s began creating a nationwide system of royal courts. The decisions of royal judges contributed to a growing body of what's called common law.
Many aspects of town life were challenging and people worked hard, but they also participated in leisure activities. Townspeople also took time off from work to celebrate special days such as religious feasts.
Fair days were especially festive as jugglers, dancers, and clowns entertained the fairgoers. Guilds also staged mystery plays in which they acted out Bible stories. Mystery plays gave rise to another type of religious drama, the miracle play.
Now we have our lesson summary. At the beginning of the Middle Ages, most Europeans lived in the countryside, but by about 1200, towns were growing.
All right, guilds, trade, and commerce. Many towns were wealthy enough to purchase a charter that made them independent from feudal lords. An economy based on trade and commerce significantly changed daily life. Guilds became leading forces in their communities. Farmers brought crops, and merchants brought many goods to sell in town marketplaces.
Homes and households. Homes varied depending on how wealthy or poor a family was. Most families had small, crowded homes with only a fireplace for heat. Few children were educated, and girls married relatively early, while boys began work as early as age 7.
Dang. All right, disease and treatment. Medieval towns were crowded, noisy, and dirty. Disease spread rapidly, and many people could not be cured with the medical knowledge of the time.
Crime and punishment. Crime was a problem in medieval towns, and it was punished harshly. Prisons were filthy, dark places, and many prisoners had to buy their own food.
All right, last but not least, leisure and entertainment. Despite these hardships in a medieval town, many types of leisure activities made life more enjoyable for town dwellers, including games, fairs, festivals, and religious plays put on by guilds.
All right, you guys, that wraps up our lesson 6 called Life in Medieval Towns. By this time, you should be able to answer our guiding question: what was life like in medieval European towns?
I'm going to ask you guys right now, how many of you guys think you'd like to be living in a medieval town based on the little bit that we just learned about? I don't know. What about you, Miss Burkholz? Would you like to live in a medieval town?
I would love to live in a castle.
In a castle, maybe?
But that's about it.
I'd like to be around people who bathe more frequently than maybe like once a month, though. A little bit.
At least you could hop in the river.
All right, you guys, make sure you know the vocab for a podcast quiz: apprentice, charter, common law, and guild. Take care.
Bye.